Okay. Yeah, I think we're set.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So where did Sudhir go?
Yeah.
I saw Sudhir a minute ago. Yeah, it's good to see you. And Vasant, I thought you had some cable problems or whatever.
Yeah, I'm on using my phone. It's fortunately working. Some people cut up my coax cable outside the house.
I'm using my phone too, so we are okay.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
I'm all yours. How do we do this?
Yeah, I'll start with some questions right now. And then once they are done, you can have conversations with these people, lovely people here.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
I'll start off with congratulating you for the International Press Freedom Award that you got.
Thank you.
And so what does freedom of press mean to you? Like, especially in these COVID times.
Well, yes. I mean, I think in a democracy we are governed by. The idea is that people who are governed have a say in the process of governance. And in order to make a good choice, you need to be informed. I think that is why freedom of press is important. Free press is important. I see free press as a disinfectant in the process of governance. It's essential for a healthy democracy, and I think a prerequisite for development. I mean, one of the things that's been touted quite a lot is that, let's have development now and we can have freedom later and things like that. It's been done at your end, it's been done at my end. And these are people who sort of say, let's put human rights and all those things on the aside for now. Let's get development. But of course, their definition of development is very problematic, and it has very little to do with the betterment of the people. But also, I think intrinsically it provides a system which is very flawed. I think a check and balance is essential to ensure that it is the interest of the people and not that of a small vested group that is being pursued. And that is where freedom of press comes in. It's a free press that can ensure that. Not all the time, but it works towards that.
Right. And what do you think about the Digital Security Act, which is being implemented in full force in Bangladesh? Like, journalists are being arrested in there.
It's hugely problematic. I mean, of course, this is not the first one. I mean, and it's not the only government that's done it, because there was a Special Powers Act, and then they had Section 57B, and now, I mean, each time people, when they were in opposition, moaned about it, but then once they got into power, they discovered that this is quite a handy thing to have, so they even went further. So when it came to the ICT Act, we were very concerned because we knew what it was doing and what it was capable of. The government actually said that they would replace it and improve it and take into cognizance our complaints. But we discovered that when the law came in, not only did it have the worst elements of the previous laws, they even put in new things which made it much more difficult for us. And of course, they at that time also said that it would be done in consultation with the journalists. The editors for council protested very strongly. Journalists protested very strongly. One of the things that also happens is, and I'm sure it happens at your end, there is a division within the professionals as well. So there was a group that set up a splinter group, went pro-government and tried to then justify some of these things. So it became very problematic. But, what is happening today is absolutely horrendous. The number of journalists, artists, writers who are being picked up, dissenters of any form, whistleblowers, And of course, they get picked up in the middle of the night. Before, it used to be during iftar that they would pick them up, and now it's gone back to being in the night. And of course, there is no recourse to justice, and none of them get bail. So it really is horrendous.
Yeah. So you yourself mentioned that it was last year that you were detained, right? You were arrested last year.
In fact,
Yeah.
this very night, today's the 5th of August, it was late this very day that I got picked up. I was reporting on the students' protest, and on the 4th, the day before, I got attacked. I mean, there were these armed hooligans beating up the unarmed kids. I got attacked, my equipment got smashed up. I continued reporting, and then the following day, again, I was out doing Facebook live feed. I came back to do an interview on Al Jazeera. I was alone in the flat that night. The doorbell rang. We sort of run an open house, with students and activists and other people coming in at all times. And I looked through the window. There was a young woman with short hair who said, "Uncle Shahidul." Actually, that should have alerted me, because my students never called me Uncle Shahidul, so I should have been aware. But I thought this might have been my partner's student or something like that. I opened the door, and suddenly all these people who were hiding outside of view then stormed in. Now, I know, I live in Bangladesh, I know what the deal is. So certainly I was, when that happened, I knew exactly what was going to go on. So I tried to delay things as much as I could. I made as much noise as I could. The idea really was that someone should know what's happening to me. I shouldn't leave quietly for people to come into the flat and then discover that I'm gone. It would have been too late. I didn't know whether, what I was trying to do had an effect, whether people got to know, because they dragged me down, they blindfolded me, handcuffed me, and took me away. And of course, that night I got tortured, and it was a very scary night anyway. But the following morning, as they were taking me to the police station, the police headquarters, I managed to see my students from the window, and I knew that if they knew I was where I was, they would not leave anything unturned. So that gave me strength.
Okay. So, what has changed now? Like after a year, what do you think has changed now in the situation, or it's still the same?
No, several things have changed. One, the government's still in election, so it is a completely rigged election. At that time, it was prior to the election. So while we sensed that they would try and rig the election, we didn't really know the extent to which this would happen. But this was a complete sham, as it turned out. And of course, in the protest, they also had complete, we realized that they had complete control over the judiciary, the police, the bureaucracy, whatever. The state machinery had all become government machinery. And we really had nothing on our side. And over the period of time, it has just become more and more repressive. And now, under the umbrella of COVID, the number of people who have been being picked up and killed is staggering.
So, then what do you think can be done here? Is there a movement sort of ongoing, or like how can this be stopped?
Well, there is no easy answer. That's something I think we need to recognize, because when a government puts personal gain above public interest, it will only change its mind if it smells a personal benefit of some sort. So I don't think it's realistic to expect the government like this to change. They will only change if they're made to change. In the absence of that possibility, citizens support by the press need to be constantly resisting what the government does and monitoring government action. In totalitarian regimes, as we have in South Asia and certainly in India, Sri Lanka is now heading very, very fast in that direction as well. This is difficult and dangerous. But they can get away with it when dissenters and whistleblowers are isolated and unprotected. And I think that is the trap we find ourselves in, because there are brave people who do resist, taking huge risks in this process. But they're not sufficiently supported. They're on their own, and because they're on their own, they get isolated and vulnerable. If protests take place in large enough numbers, there is no way they can withstand this sort of pressure. I mean, in India, when there was the resistance to CAA and NRC, it happened at a scale that they could not contain it. Sadly, resistance of that scale has not happened in Bangladesh, which is ironic when you consider the history of Bangladesh, how artists, journalists, activists have resisted throughout our history, that today there are so many people who are silent, I think is the biggest fear. I mean, the governments do what they do. Every government we've had has done the same thing. It's just gone up in scale. But people have resisted in the past. Today, people whom you would expect to resist, who you would expect to be counted, who have in the past spoken out in the cause for justice, are very silent. And that, I think, is the very scary thing. I think we need to rally around dissenters, whistleblowers, and demonstrate in large numbers that these people are not alone. There is no replacement for mass action. And it requires, but the problem is it also requires responsible and creative leadership. On the other hand, even if there are few people to provide that leadership, it can lead to dramatic shifts. There aren't too many of those few people. Let me just write this camera, actually. We're not live, I presume?
No.
No. So let me just fix this. I think this is on a screen. Like the sometime on a mobile phone. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So my next question is like, do you think the lines between journalism and activism are blurring these days? Or was it the situation earlier as well?
No, that assumes that we are monolithic entities, that a person is what that person is without, that a journalist is. I guess I'm a journalist, so-and-so's an activist. We're all multifaceted people with many avatars, if you like. And each one of us finds his or her own way to get to where the person wants to get to. Now, I'm an activist. I've always been an activist. It's my politics that determined why I took up photography. I recognized what a powerful tool it was, and I decided that was the tool I was going to take up. I mean, I've been trained very differently. I came from a very different background. No one in previous generations had ever been either an artist or a journalist. For me, it was a very conscious decision that this is what I wanted to do with my life, and I would take up the best tools available. I practice journalism because it's such a powerful mechanism to engage and resist, and I use art because, again, it gets under the skin. It can do things that are very difficult to do through other means often. And the combination is a very powerful combination, I think. So I myself am an activist, a journalist, an artist, and I see no confusion there. The confusion comes in when within our practice we forget those differences. So as a journalist, I need to adhere to the rigors of journalism. I need to be fair. I need to be, as I wouldn't say objective, because I think that is a problematic term, because it assumes that we don't have a position. Of course, we all have positions. But I think accurate, being representational, and not distorting the situation is part of it. But I wear my politics on my sleeve. I made no pretenses about being anything else. I mean, if there was a fence and there's a powerful and underdog on one side, I would not stand on the fence. I would clearly be on the side of underdogs, and that is my position. I make it very clear. Once you've made that position clear, as an artist, you use the power of art to do what you can. As a journalist, you adhere to the rigor of the profession. I think they're not mutually exclusive.
Right. So now tell us something about Drik Photo Library and Pathshala. Tell us about your students.
Okay, well, the Photo Library started a long time back. It was 1989. And at that time, there weren't photo libraries in our part of the world. I had begun photography before that. I was working as a professional photographer in London. I was represented by an agency in the UK. But I began to see the type of imagery that they relied upon and what stories they wanted to tell. And I was very conscious that our stories were being told by other people. That we were, others were determining the narrative. The story was not our story. I'm very fond of an African expression which goes something like, until the lions find their storytellers, stories about hunting will always glorify the hunter. And I come back to that. Our stories have been told by and large by white Western photographers who've come in and parachuted in. They've usually had diarrhea for the first couple of days and taken pictures on the next and gone back with pretty much the stock images that they came to get. They're hunter-gatherers. They were not interested in the nuanced stories that needed to be told. Some of what they were telling about my country, that I call the majority world countries, is valid. We have poverty, we have strife, we have disasters that we cope with, but that is not certainly our only identity. And I think the real story is the resilience of people, their capability to withstand such enormous pressures that they have to deal with in their day-to-day lives. To me, the biggest story is how people rally and help one another at a time like that. Bangladesh is the development university of the world. Anyone who wants to be a development professional has to, at some point, this is the Mecca that they have to come to. So everyone is there. We have thousands of NGOs, and all these experiments are tried at our place. What very few of them mention is that the real reason we're able to survive is because the poor of my country are as generous as they are. There is a tremendous support structure within the poor. We don't have social welfare, we don't have a relief system, but I do not know of a single family that does not support another. I'll tell you a little story. This was during the 1991 cyclone. There was a young girl called Sifia, and this was in Anwara, and she had absolutely lost everything. The home was gone, the family. She did not have a single family member alive. This was this little girl all by herself. The home is gone. And I sort of thought, what's going to happen to this girl? Who will look after her? She's as orphan as it can possibly be, and in that sort of a situation. Then I soon found that there was another family, and and the woman, that family became Sutia's Khala, and this became her family. And this was a family just as poor, just in not knowing where they themselves would get the next meal. Yes, he was the child that needed a home, so they embraced that child, and that child became a part of his home. And that happens so often, and it has happened historically. I mean, we've had the Jagidda system in our culture, where young people have been tutors, and later on, if things work out, they married the daughter and became part of the family. This is so intrinsic a part of our culture. Yet that is a story that is never told. We're told about what governments do, we're told about what NGOs do, but the fact that the four or five countries do so much for the country and for each other is a story that is untold. So to come back to the answer to your question, the idea behind setting up Drik was that we would be telling our stories, and these are stories that we have to tell to the world. But as we went along, then you realize, you were fighting a fight, and if that's what you have to do, then you need warriors, and you could only do so much yourself. So that was when we set up school, and in a sense, it's worked out very well, because it's that social justice environment within which the students have grown up. So their practice is also informed by the struggles that we're embedded within. So they have a very different working practice. And in a way, the partnership between Drik and Pathshala works a little bit like, you have these teaching hospitals where students work in a hospital, and that is the way they learn. So Drik, being a production house, a media organization, a media research center, is a very good resource for the students to interact with. It's also good for us. We get to identify the best students over this time, and hopefully some of them join us and work with us. So that ecosystem, and it was because Drik was there that we were able to set up Pathshala. It was because Drik and Pathshala were there, we were able to set up the festival. And now the three together form a wonderful ecosystem.
Wow. So then what sort of a difference do you see in today's generation, like the perspective? What is your observation? Like on your students and in general photojournalists of this particular generation?
I think there are two very different environments which allow them. I mean, when I started, I'm a self-taught photographer, and what I did was I would go to every library I could, pick up every book I could. I devoured something like 800 books on photography. I didn't understand much of that, but I did. I mean, I was absolutely voracious in my appetite for learning. But it was still very difficult. I didn't have mentors. I didn't have other people to guide me. I looked at work, but what I saw was photography. I knew very little about their lives. I knew very little about what made them tick. I knew very little about what they were like, who these people were outside of their presence as a photographer. Today, I think the internet has changed things completely. I mean, it's a wonderful environment through which photographers get to see such a diverse range of practice, get to know people, get to interact in a way that was certainly never possible before. And that is all good. I think what has also happened in a sense is it has perhaps made people realize or assume that things are very easy. It also has to do with manufacturers. I think advertising is much stronger today than it was. We live in a very consumerist society. And there is no dearth of manufacturers who tell you that this is the camera that you need, this is the lens that you need that will make you a great photographer. And that consumerist barrage is not so easy for many people to resist. So they fall into that trap, forgetting that there is far more to the medium than pressing the shutter for a start, And there's far more to pressing a shutter than merely having a fancy camera and a fancy lens. So I think moving away from that is important. There was something that happened a long time ago, which I'm very envious of. You know, when you look at the little gallery in the early 1900s in New York, where, you know, the F-64 group or other photographers who then were very close to the European masters, people like Matisse, Monet, Bratucci, Rodin. They all worked with Strand and Ansel Adams and Edward Weston. You know, they were part of one suit. So and these artists showed their first work in a photographic gallery, you know, in New York. So there was that, you know, that influence, that soup, bubbling melting pot within which they all were. Today, I think we work in silos a lot more. And there are these specializations, which is okay. I don't mind specialization, but specialization should not necessarily build silos. I think one of the things which is me very interesting, I mean, Riaz is here. I was very happy when I participated in Photojournalist because there was an art festival which embraced such a wonderful plurality within its practice. And I think that is good for all practitioners. You know, we have so much to gain from each other, and it's by building these artificial walls that we distance ourselves and stop ourselves from maturing and growing. I don't know what the scene is like in India so much, but in Bangladesh, for a very, very long time, photography was a complete outcast because the mainstream artists, the other artists, refused to recognize photography as an art form. We have the Asian Biennale, which has been going on for 30 or so years. And until a couple of biennales ago, after a lot of protests from us, they first started introducing photography and video. Before that, it was forbidden to, the entry rules would forbid the entry of photography and video. This is in the 21st century. It's bizarre. And everyone has lost out as a result. Today, I think entities like the Dhaka Art Summit have opened up a very different space. And you know, certainly Riaz and the others at your end have done that. But I think it's not just artists. I think we need to interact with poets, with writers, with scientists, with philosophers. And it is that plural space that will allow us to grow and flourish. But that is beginning to happen, and there was a dip in the middle. And I think now, at least in our practice, that is coming back. And what that does is also change some of the definitions. And I think part of what happened before were these definitions became so important that people were not able to break out of it. Now they can.
Right. Right, sir. So what do you think about social documentary, like social documentation, photo documentation of social issues and documentary in general, the situation right now?
In a sense, you've just brought, I mean, what I said just dovetails into this. I mean, several years back, Christian Sejol, Robert Sledge, myself, Susan Michelis, Reza Degati, we were all at a festival in, I think it was Barcelona. And Christian came up with a very interesting observation. He was sort of asking us, but he was speaking out aloud, I suppose, that had Eugene Smith, the great Eugene Smith, been alive today, I mean, he did this monumental work on Pittsburgh, which is this incredible body of work. And he was, though he'd done it for so long, he was dissatisfied. He wanted to continue. But the question was different. The question was, had Billie Jean Smith been around today, would he have told the story in the same way? Now, I found that a fascinating question because, you know, if you look at literature, you know, Chaucer's English was very different from Shakespeare's English to Salman Rushdie to Arundhati Roy. everyone finds his or her own space within a particular environment, and we speak to a different audience. And as we do, we need to find different ways of connecting. And the old ways, I mean, there's nothing wrong with either Chaucer's English or Shakespeare's English, but that perhaps would not be the appropriate language to use today to speak to the current generation. I think photographers for a long time have gotten into that idea of being pure, or purists, if you like, and married to a particular approach of storytelling, forgetting that the landscape has shifted and they need to be shifting as well in order to not be irrelevant. And what has happened today is there are people who are telling stories in very, very different ways. And social documentary no longer has the very staid form of black and white, classical, photographic, linear mechanism of telling stories. There's abstraction, there's conceptual work, and all of that is embraced by what is now considered social documentary. And I think all for the better. And I think we now have a much more nuanced, complicated in some cases, but much more rich vocabulary than we did in the past. And I think that is all for the better. I have no problems with classical photography. I have no problems with people telling stories the way they used to. And there are people who do very beautifully. I mean, I think it was last month I was in conversation with Sebastian Salgado, and he's one of these great photographers who has that classical approach and does it so well. You have Raghu Ryan, there are so many other people who do this. I admire them, but I don't think that is the only way to work. And I think it is important to open up that possibility. And I think it is very important that young photographers today are embracing those possibilities.
Right. So, and can you just walk us through your process, like from clicking a photo, like to conveying a story? How do you go about it, like for
Well,
a young readers, basically?
I object to the word clicking. I object to the word snapping. They imply that photography is much more about the hunting, gathering that is talked about. They imply it is about snapping things. And, sure, I mean, photography can be an instinctive process, and there are times when you have to react instinctively. But that doesn't make it a mechanism of pecking, if you like. It is a much more thoughtful process. It is a considered process. And the photographers who produce the best work, in my mind, are people who, if you like, being able to absorb that within their being. So even if they are, and there are photographers who produce beautiful, powerful work in warlike situations. Of course, they work very quickly, they work in difficult conditions, they react instinctively, but they can do that because they have been through a process where the camera is an extension of themselves. I mean, I wasn't being facetious. I was deliberately saying that we should consciously move away from words such as snapping or clicking, because I think we need to take on photography to what it is. So coming back to that, a lot of my work is about research. I spend a huge amount of time planning. I mean, that's not to say that I do not respond to the instinctive responses that light and time and moments do not influence me, and that I do not get seduced by all those elements that photographers get seduced by. But I do spend a huge amount of time planning, conceptualizing, far more than I actually spend taking pictures. And to give you an extreme example, the work I did on Kalpana Chashma, the first story I did in Kalpana Chashma, which is about this indigenous woman who was disappeared, was through a pseudo-forensic technique that I developed because I wanted to interrogate silent witnesses. So what I was doing is I followed the last journey that Kalpana had made the day she was abducted. And because in the investigation, people had given no importance to the eyewitnesses and taken account only of the military and the Bengali settlers, I decided to ask questions of a rock that she walked past, the bark of a tree, a leaf that she might have brushed as she walks along, and things like that. To me, these were witnesses whom I wanted to ask questions of. And I developed a technique which initially began in Bangladesh, then I worked in Britain, then I worked in Germany. Eventually, I identified a scientific laboratory in Brisbane where I produced the work. So I actually flew to Australia. I spent 12 hours flat producing the photograph, and I spent something like 6-7 months prior to that planning, experimenting, investigating, working out the possibilities. The actual picture taking was was less than a day, if you like, if you think in 24 hours.
Mhm. Wonderful. So even I saw your interview in that Storytellers Summit. You shared a few photos, a lot of photos. I especially liked that story about that boy, house help Mizan, you shared, whose photo you had carried on in the calendar and who was able to sit and watch TV in the living room next day. I hope I'm getting it correct.
You're absolutely right. Sorry, so what's the question?
So I want to ask, like, the process, like, now that you explain, do you think this whole process of bringing in change, is how challenging it is? Like, you'll obviously have a lot of obstructions or some sort of hindrances.
I think the biggest challenge really is to recognize one's own failing. We are generally very blind to that. And being able to confront oneself, being able to question oneself, being able to recognize that one has made mistakes is not something we're trained to do. Instinctively, we surround ourselves by friends, and by friends we define them as people who say good things about us, who do not critique us, who do not question us. And that's a very dangerous environment to find oneself in. I'm very lucky. I have a partner who is perhaps my biggest critic and my dearest friend. And this is what we do about each other. And we often do go astray. We do the wrong things, and at least there is someone very close to you who can stop you when you're doing that and can point it out and hopefully help you rectify it. So now I had lived abroad. I had 12 years. I was outside. I left her when I was 17. I came back when I was 29. So I'd left as a young man, and in South Asia, a 17-year-old is actually quite young. We're not as independent as we might be in the West or anything like that. When I came back, I was a young adult, and I realized that I didn't really know my parents so well. These were very important people, very special to me, whom I didn't know, and I wanted to get to know them. So I made a conscious decision that I would live with them when I came back. I knew it was going to be difficult because I'd become a very independent person for a long time. I'd lived my own for so long. I did a very free life, if you like. And a lot of that would be difficult for my parents to deal with. But I wanted to do that regardless. And it had its challenges. It was difficult both for them and for me. But one of the things I discovered was what you mentioned with Mizan. I mean, my parents were both very emancipated, very educated, very progressive people. Yet, as for most of us in South Asia, the middle class people, we have home health. And we tend to say very nice things about ourselves, but by and large, it's a very class-based society where the class difference between us and the home health is very, very stark. And their lives are very different from our lives. And we tend to forget that. While we make grand speeches about rights and our faith within it, we often forget that we ourselves are often perpetrators of great injustice. So this is, in their eyes, a small thing. I mean, neither Mizan nor my parents ever questioned the fact that they should sit inside to watch television and Mizan sit outside. But it struck me, and I thought, okay, what do I do? As a photographer, I have to do. So I took that picture, and then what used to happen also was calendars at that time in Bangladesh were about pretty pictures. They were about pretty women or nature or flowers or parts of nature itself or mosques perhaps, those sort of things. Social messages were not things that calendars carried. We began right from the beginning, from 1990, which is our first calendar, we began to use the calendar as a vehicle to set our social messages. So that year, actually, I did a calendar on my own work because I was also trying to look at a body of work rather than discrete individual pictures. So how one approached a particular idea. So within that calendar, we had two pictures. There was one, the first picture was of rich kids watching TV in the home of a minister. These were plump kids sitting inside a large screen, very very vulgar in the opulence, if you like. And then next to that was, the following page was Mizan watching TV in our own home. And of course, after that got published, I gave a copy to Mizan and one to my mother. And the following day, she sat inside to watch TV. I think it's a huge step for all of us. What I regret is the fact that I've lost touch with Mizan. He eventually decided he was not going to live that life. He took on a physically much more arduous life of riding a rickshaw, but that gave him independence. And good luck to him. So I don't know where he is now, but I think he is kind of like this.
Oh, that's great. What keeps you? I'm just last few questions. What keeps you going despite the climate of dissent and despite all your troubles? I mean, all your trouble is a very understated word, though. But despite all of your problems, what keeps you going? Like,
in a sense, I think I've answered part of that. I mean, I do what I do because I believe in it. Many people end up in professions which help them get a job, which I think is important, to help make a living. But we grow up, we have families, we get children, we get a mortgage, we get a medical insurance, and then we die. If that be the trajectory that we all follow, I think it's a pretty meaningless trajectory. I mean, not much of a reason for living. I think there has to be more to life than merely being materially successful. I sort of live a life where if I had all the time and all the money in the world, I'd be doing exactly what I'm doing today. How can you complain about that? I mean, I'm fortunate that some people actually pay me for doing it, but even if they didn't, and if I had me, I would be doing exactly this. So I wake up every morning rearing to go. Every day is a new day which will further me in the direction in which I want me and us to go. So, I've not resorted to drugs, but I think I'm on a permanent high. It makes you a driven person in that sense. So I've never had a problem in terms of keeping going. Where I've had a problem is in taking a measured position, in sometimes being strategic and holding back, in sometimes deciding that perhaps the most blunt method may not be the best method. As in war, as opposed to battle, you sometimes make a strategic retreat. You sometimes lay low. You sometimes change tack. Those are all things which are not instinctively things which I feel I should do because I want to just keep going. But as I've grown older, perhaps those are lessons that I've learned. And I don't always go with a hammer. I sometimes go as a surgeon.
That's wonderful, sir. So, and this is last question now. What message do you have for the aspiring photojournalists today?
Take risks. That's an advice I would have for anyone aspiring to do anything meaningful. We get very, very complacent. I think we live so much within our comfort zone, within the cultural space, within the social space, within the religious space, even within the artistic space that we're in. And very little actually happens in the center. Yet, our systems are designed to celebrate mediocrity. Someone who is not in the center is called abnormal. I don't see what's so great about being normal. Yet, all the parameters, the way things are tested, we do a medical test, everything is based on your adherence to normality, and everything that is abnormal, if you like, is bad by definition. If you look at evolution, evolution has only taken place, and the reason we are the Homo sapiens that we are and not the bacteria that we started with is because nature has made mistakes, it's taken risks, and it's embraced those risks and taken on board the few good things that have happened despite all the things that have gone wrong. Now, yet within our systems, we resist risk-taking, or at least resist being outside that center. I think the most interesting things happen in the periphery, in the field of art, in whatever field, and particularly in the field of art. I think it's when the edges collide that some of the most interesting things happen. That's where the sparks are. That's also where you fall through the gaps. That's also a risk that you need to take. I would also suggest that you interact with people outside your profession and never, ever take anything for granted. And I'll end with one thing which I think is more important than anything ever. Constantly ask questions, particularly of yourself.
Thank you so much, sir, for talking to us. Now, I would like to, it was really enlightening. Thank you so much. I would like to ask Sudharak sir and Vasant and Riyaz sir to take over now.
आपका बहुत अच्छा रहा, बहुत आपका हर बार इंस्पायरिंग रहता है आपको देखना और मिलना। मुझे याद है आपको कुछ साल पहले
आपको सरकार तो मेरे वीजा नहीं देता, so this is the only way we can interact.
Yes, ये बहुत अच्छा है, लेकिन पिछले बार आप आ गए थे तो मैं नहीं था, मैं बाहर था, मुलाकात नहीं हो पाई, लेकिन मुझे याद है आपने नेशनल ज्योग्राफी के लिए नॉमिनेट किया था।
I missed you in between. You have to repeat that.
So I said, I still remember a midnight call from you from New York airport. It's 1:32 a.m. in the night. You said, send me the pictures in the next couple of hours. And then I was part of the National Geographic all-round photographers. And then I visited a couple of times to Dhaka. And it was always inspiring the way I learned from you. And I tried to put them into the act also. But there's still a long way to go. Thank you for talking to us. So I'll just ask Vasant and Riyaz to kind of take this conversation. What happened in India or in Bangladesh probably? There's not much writing by philosopher, poet, famous writer on photography. I think that is the only reason that photography is behind in India.
Vasant, I think you'll have to speak more slowly. Actually, I don't know what's happening because on my screen it shows that you are muted. Are you muted? You can't be. I can hear you.
I'm not muted. Okay, so but I
No,
can
exactly. On my screen it shows it's muted. But never mind. I can hear you. Just speak a bit more slowly because you're breaking up.
Okay,
It may
so
be a connection.
my question is why there is not much writing on photography by philosophers, famous writers, and poets in this continent.
Why there is fighting? Is that the word?
Writing.
Writing.
Not much
Or
writing
why
on.
there is? Yeah. It's a very important question. In fact, um, one of the things that a lot of people who come into photography come in for is because they think they don't have to write. This includes some students who join Pathshala or other schools because they think, I don't like writing, so I can do photography. Sure, you do photography, but in fact, writing is such an important part of the photographic process. Firstly, I see myself not as a photographer, but as a storyteller. And as a storyteller, one uses whatever mechanism of storytelling that works, which includes words, pictures, it could be music, it could be dance. I'm not much of a musician or a dancer, so there's not much joy there, but I can take pictures and I do write. So that's what I do. But it's a very, very powerful combination. Yet, not many photographers take it on. And I find it very sad because they complement each other so well. Now, one of the things which is so beautiful, I mean, many years ago, I had a show in Mexico City, and after that, there was a reception in a warehouse, and sitting on the chair behind me was Gabriela Garcia Marquez. And I was just so blown away that this guy had come to meet us and that I could talk to him or whatever. But the reason I mention him is because you read his work and you see it's so visual. The entire work is almost a script unfolding. You can see it with your eyes. And I think the finest writers have all been very, very visual people. Similarly, I think photographers can use words in such an interesting way where they can complement each other. And I think there are things that reinforce. Now, I recognize that there are very few people who write well about photography. And that also has to do with, I think, the fact that photography, until relatively recently, has not been taken so seriously by other professionals.
Yeah.
It's been seen as a lowly craft, even within media itself. In the newspaper, the photographer is at the lowest of the pecking order. They're considered the illiterate people, and of course, there was a time when photographers needed other people to help them write their captions and things like that. That's no longer the case. But there are people who consider photographers to be illiterate. They forget that they themselves are often visually illiterate. And that visual literacy is a perfectly valid and important part of literacy. It's something that has not been gotten across. And we don't teach visual literacy in our schools. So today, when our minds are influenced so much by visuals, by politicians, by advertisers, by activists, by jihadis, whatever, the fact that and when I say jihadis, I mean extremists, not say one particular type of extremism. But the point I'm making is we are inundated by imagery. Our minds are influenced by images from a very, very young age. Yet we are not taught to read images, decipher images, combat images, resist images if you need to. And images just, we soak it in. I mean, it's like something that sinks through your epidermis. We are incapable of resisting images. We absorb them like a sponge. Yet we're never aware. We're not told that that is what's happening to you. Advertisers use it constantly to guide us in certain ways, build us into a certain mold, into a certain type of consumer. But I think had visual literacy been given importance, had other professionals also recognized visual literacy as a valid language, they would have learned it better. And had photographers themselves taken visual literacy as opposed to simply photography as a valid learning exercise, they would have learned better. The problem that comes up is when people are asked to write about photography, because photographers do not write themselves generally, it then falls to other people to write about photography who are actually not very knowledgeable about the medium. So you have people who have very little understanding of the medium writing about it, and therefore a lot of what is written about photography is actually extremely boring, for want of a better word.
Vasant, Riaz?
Yeah. Riaz, you want to go? You have something to... Riaz, you're muted.
Not on my end, I can hear. Oh, he is muted, but it's shown from this end.
Okay, I can't hear Riaz, so go ahead. Do you want me to say till he figures out?
Yeah, sure. Let him do that. Go on.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing your time with us on this day that 2 years ago you were, arrested and isolated. And,
you go yet. The clock is ticking.
But we are so glad that you can be here and be doing things. What I want to ask you are two small questions here. One is the world attention that your arrest and detention brought on. Has that deterred, or has it helped you continue with what you're doing in terms of just the world focus? Has that, what has that done for you?
I think it helps in several ways. One is always scared of being arrested, of being tortured, of what might happen. I've been there, done that. I know I know what they can do to me, and I know I can withstand it. So I'm stronger, I think. That fear of the unknown is no longer an unknown. They might not stop at this stage. They might bump me off, I suppose, but at least I know I can take what they're giving me, and that, apart from anything else, that gives me a strength. But what has also happened is the real pain was not felt by me. It was felt by people outside. It was my family, it was my friends, it was the people who were rooting for me, who struggled. They had to deal with my not being there. They had to deal with the financial issues, the legal issues, the security issues, getting information out. It was a whole group of people working flat out at an intense pace for a very, very long time. And they were really running ragged because of what they were doing. But through that process, I think a solidarity took place, which is unprecedented. There were all these scattered friends of mine across the globe who then came on board, and it was really a massive concerted action. What you all did in India was phenomenal. I think Raghu Rai wrote that letter. I mean, I was picked up on the night of the night of the 5th. On the 6th, Raghu wrote the open letter to the Prime Minister. On the 7th, it was in the media. That was how quick it was. And then really, pretty much everyone poured in. And that is what saved my life, I think. I think the fact that it was so visible that what they were doing was being, everyone was watching, was, I think, what saved my life. But the other things that have happened is, as a result, what is happening here has had a visibility, not just me, but the work that we do has had a visibility that it might not have had in the same way. I've actually, I use my time in jail very, very productively. I did interviews every day. I met people I might never have met otherwise, and people who would have been difficult for me to get to under normal circumstances. But you know, in jail, getting an appointment is not so difficult. You don't have to meet a secretary. You don't have to make an appointment. You don't have to worry about whether they're available and things like that. So, no, I went around every day doing very, very good interviews, and it gave me a huge insight. But the friends I've made during that time, you know, is phenomenal. I'll tell you a little story. You know, at Chobi Mela, where University Road was going to speak, the government tried to close it down the previous day. They cancelled the venue, and we had to find 1,000-seater venue in one day. Then no one wanted to be seen as being Shahidul friendly. So we managed to find a place, but we didn't know how we'd get it. And I used my jail contact. They said, for you, anything. So that was how we got the place, and we were able to do this. That's just one example, and there are many others. And I stay in touch with my friends, and we continue to do things together. I'm now doing a lot of work on jail reform. I was able to kickstart setting up a musical band while I was there. And since then, they've written 40 songs. They formed a band. We were involved in painting murals inside jail, and now there are about over 50 murals all across. And these are, some of them are 32 feet wide. All of the interior of the jail looks like a museum. These are all we've been able to do. You know. But to answer your question very specifically, and I won't make this any longer, you know, what happened was, before I was arrested, I would have been known by people like you and other professionals. The average person didn't know, either within Bangladesh or outside. But today, I have to be careful. I don't go around on a bicycle anymore because it's no longer safe. But if I'm seen in the street, the average person recognizes me. People, okay, now it's Corona days, so I don't get hugged anymore. But people used to hug me. They would have tears in their eyes. They would say, "You stood up for us when no one else did it." But something very interesting happened. I was leaving the office, and a woman with a little baby, a newborn baby, came up to me, and she said, "Can you bless my child? I want him to grow up to be brave as you." And that I can give that sort of a feeling to someone I have no contact with otherwise, and that in some way I can give hope, is something that means so much.
Thank you. Riaz?
Still can't hear you.
Shraddha, you can unmute Riaz, or is he not able?
You're moving, no?
No, he's unmute right now.
No, nobody can hear Riaz, correct?
Yeah.
Maybe it's his mic.
Can we chat? Tell him on text. I have one more question.
Okay.
Riaz can't come
Sure.
on.
He's rejoining, and we can continue.
Okay. All the wonderful institutions and programs you've set up, I'm sure are facing financial burdens at this point, as every institution is in the world. Is there any particular way to have people help? Is there an organized method, or is it difficult?
It's extremely difficult right now. I mean, this is I'm happy you asked the question, because the combination of persecution and COVID has really been a hammer blow to us. And we are in a very, very precarious situation. There is also a very practical thing that has happened. I don't know if you knew, we were trying to build a new building which we were going to move into. And we had put away some money for the completion of the building. and we deposited it in a finance company. But very few people seem to know it. There's a huge financial debacle in Bangladesh, and none of the finance companies are able to pay back. So the money that we saved up is stuck, and we now have to finish this building, and we're not able to. So we are actually in a very, very difficult situation right now. We are hoping to set up some sort of a crowdfunding or something like that, and maybe if there are people in your network who have the expertise who could help us with that or any other way, that would really make a big difference, because we are in deep shit, basically. And unless we're able to do something fairly quickly, both Drik and Pathshala might fold.
We can't let that happen.
We mustn't. Too much at stake.
Riaz? Oh.
I can see Siddharth now, again. You know, if Riaz cannot speak, maybe he can text. I can look at the chat and answer. Does that work?
That's a good idea.
Is this are you going to do this on audio or is it text? Has Riaz come back?
Yeah, through iPhone, I guess. Yeah. Hello? Riaz, sir? Yeah. I think. Yeah, now he's audible.
Yeah, I just. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just changed into my phone. I don't know, something is wrong with my computer, laptop. Hi, Shahidul. It's
Hi.
yeah, I've been
Good
kind of,
you know,
good to see you, and wonderful. I mean, it's always a pleasure to listen to you. I think also Shraddha asked some wonderful questions. I mean, it was beautifully elaborated answers. So thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, I was telling Sudharit, like, I mean, I'll join, and I would love to kind of sit and listen to how Shahidul speaks, especially on a day that as you mentioned, I mean, you were arrested and you had gone through a lot of pain. We all remember joining writing and petitions and other things. It's been yeah, so. And I mean, and also today, I think I was just thinking, like, and what a coincidence that we are speaking. Yesterday, we lost one of the biggest, stars of Indian, secular icon. Alkasi Saab left us, and so I was just wondering, like, I mean, he's somebody who made, amazing, mix of art and cinema. I mean, art and theater and many other things. And also today, we were also witnessing that, the Bhumi Pujan, at Ayodhya. I mean, the whole country is busy with that, and it's also, I mean, many.
And this also when the Kashmir law, Article 370.
Yeah, I think there's many levels of I think. I mean, the day we are speaking with you, like, I mean, I thought, I mean, what a coming together of many things. But I had many other, things to kind of ask. But what I thought was, like, in continuation with Sudharagas, and I'll also point this particular question only into one question. I think we can always speak later. But I happened to hear, recently, 2 days ago, in one interview, Ganesh Devi, one of the most important linguistics we have in India, who studies, I mean, kind of researches on, like, I mean, different kind of languages all across. I mean, and he's done an extensive study. He made, 3 interesting remarks. I just want to speak about, I mean, as a question about photography in the end, but he made a very interesting remark about the demise of Sanskrit. I mean, how it happened, because it played a role of, a certain supremacy. and now we have a regime which is like, trying to bring that back. So the question was in that context. But at the same time, he also said English is dying as a language. So then he gave a lot of interesting examples for that. Why do we say that English language is dying? So he meant to say that professionally that language is dying. It's because one was its role of supremacy. Second, the way it got kind of mixed up with different kind of cultural spheres. So my question is about photography in that sense, because you see that nowadays that many institutions are busy making archives of wonderful stories. People like you did, and many institutions, many senior photographers, also contemporary photographers. But then at the same time, you see that photography has become the real means even to kind of sell the equipments which is available in today's time. So there is what you see is like there is too much of image making happening. Why I'm saying it is like in the interview, Ganesh Devi says that we are also entering into a kind of non-language era, that we are entering into a sign language era, that we are going to use more of sign and visuals and imageries. But at the same time, I was thinking like, you being a professional photographer, you three of, even Vasant and Sudarak, that photography has that played a very supreme role in as a kind of historic, as a historic memory for us. Many of our political arguments which we do also today with those kind of memorial archives. But today we see that, sometimes the question is also because you feel that because of the too much of, production, the amateur ways of using it, and using photography as a medium to kind of, to penetrate into social media, so how do we protect, that photography as a kind of professional medium, which is also under, a lot of digital surveillance, because of, the regimes don't want the professional photographers, thinkers, conceptualists to tell stories to people. Like you're saying that, this is also time for us to tell stories. So I'm just, concerned about how you professional photographers are going to counter to get a space in this ocean of like, image making. How do you recalibrate that space to kind of talk to an audience, talk to a community, or reach out the right image? I'm only limiting my question to this particular one, because I thought it's also in continuation with Sudarek's argument about how do you elevate photography through writing and editing.
Okay, well, this device, a pen, is something I would assume all of us have. We all own a pen and pencil. I don't think we necessarily, because we own a pen or a pencil, assume we are writers.
Yeah.
Yet, when it comes to photography, the fact that we can take pictures suddenly is equated with us being photographers. The fact that I can scribble, the fact that I can draw, the fact that I can, or even speak, for instance, though speak is a different thing. I think photography, in the way in which it has been democratized, is very good for the medium.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that has happened is this expertism that we create artificially, is part of a myth making whereby we tend to make the craft so complicated. And there was a time when the craft was so complicated that if you were a photographer, you had to carry big things, you had to mix up your own chemicals, you had to know much, you had to know your chemistry and engineering and all that sort of thing. Today, a mobile phone is all you need. But I think what that does is it does two things. One, it allows other people to take photographs, and I think that's very helpful because there was a time when our position was so unchallenged that we ourselves were in danger of being complacent in our space. I think every serious photographer's work will be, the work that I do will be done by many other people in many other ways. And that is something that I need to be aware of constantly. Therefore, my work needs to rise above that to be able to transcend that space. There was a time when being at the right place at the right time was all that was necessary. Today, there will be many people at the right place at the right time. So simply doing that is not enough. You need to add value to that situation. Your way of seeing needs in some way to enhance the reading of whatever you're providing. And in order to be able to do that, you need to be able to rise aesthetically, intellectually, conceptually beyond merely the act of picture taking. So I actually find that a good thing. There is another aspect that I want to talk about, and that is you mentioned archives, and a lot of photography is about archiving and about memory. Now, memory is a very selective thing. It is selective in real life because we remember certain things, we forget other things, and we are very selective in what we remember and what we do not. But a lot of what is retained historically is retained because it has been photographed or written about, but nowadays more importantly photographed. And because it was in the hands of certain people, because it was constrained within power structures, only certain things were remembered and other things were forgotten. So there are vast swathes of history which do not exist because the historians of that time, the photo historians of that time, did not find it important for us to remember them. I think the fact that it is much more pluralistic today means that, sure, there will be other filtering mechanisms and perhaps some will disappear, but if one is careful and if one makes that effort, one can retain a lot of that history that might otherwise have been lost. And I think what that does is it changes the environment. I mean, there's a thing in music that is often used, Fourier synthesis. You know, in music you have the Dolby system, and that is used as a mechanism whereby you separate noise from signal. The core principle is that if you have a lot of noise, the way to enhance signal is to do multiple sampling through which the noise gets randomized and the signal emerges. In photographic terms, you would see it in terms of old photographs of water, where still objects are still, but because the water taken over a long exposure gets averaged out, the surface of the water is absolutely still. So if we look at the ripples as noise, all of that is removed and the surface of the water is seen like a sheet of glass, like a rock or anything else would have been seen. But that is through this process of integration, where the accumulated information so the noise rounded out. And I think today, because there is so much photography around, provided it continues, the best work will still rise from there, because that will be the rock within the water which will surface.
Thank you. Thank you. Vasant, I mean, you can carry on.
Just two small observations regarding writing that was brought up by Sudhara is there are not enough platforms or avenues for people to feel convinced that writing about photography can bring them something. You know, there are limited places. And it's a chicken and the egg syndrome. If there are no places to write and publish, people aren't going to be interested. And if people are not interested, there aren't going to be enough places for them to be published. So I think some of that may be something that is happening in South Asia. I would like to ask you all if what your thoughts on that are. And one thing that always struck me is it's so easy for people to say, I'm a photographer, I'm an artist, I'm a writer, because you can't go around and say, I'm a dentist or I'm an architect unless you can prove what you can do. So the whole thing about the signal to noise ratio, it's a free place for people to just claim to be certain, to perform certain functions. And like Sahil said, you've got to be well beyond the noise to be recognized or heard. So just two observations, no real questions here.
So that was an observation. So Derek, did you have a question to that?
The question is, how can we get more writing to be done? Because, I've been a little involved with certain institutions and people, and there are a handful of people that in India, at least, that I can say, hey, can you write something substantial about this work?
It's not just India, it's across the globe, sadly. I mean, that is a very, very serious issue, and an issue that needs to be addressed. And I think that also has to do with photographic education. I mean, there are schools across the globe which largely teach you about photographic technique. And really, photographic technique is such a tiny part of the photographic process. Yet, again, it comes back to manufacturers and lenses and cameras and selling products and everything else. I mean, that's what the entire thing is mired under. One of the things we do within our own school in Pathshala is we have a component. I mean, for a start, our BA degree is under the Faculty of Social Sciences. It's not in media, it's not in art. So you have to have a social sciences background within which you learn photography. And that is something we've done even before we joined Dhaka University, before we were recognized. We did creative writing, we looked at media studies, we looked at environmental studies, we looked at philosophy, visual anthropology, and we recognized that a photographer needed to be a complete human being and someone who was articulate, informed, knowledgeable, in order to be able to tell those stories better. And that was the base on which the photographic skills stood. Often that is not happening within our pedagogic process either. So I think that has to happen. But I think it goes beyond that in the sense, I first came across Arundhati's work. I mean, of course, I knew who she was, but I first came across her work when I was commissioned to curate a book by Faden called Blink. And that essentially, they identified 10 curators and 10 writers who would write about photography. And it was a piece that Arundhati had written, which is not about photography, but it is so visual that we recognize that this had a valid space within our book of photography. And there, as I mentioned before, there is that happening. But I think we as individuals, I mean, now what am I doing? I'm talking to you, all of you. We're using a language which is not our language. We are communicating in the language of words, but we are talking about our medium. And I think talking about our medium to other languages requires a certain level of gymnastics. When you do exercises, you exercise the muscles that are weak. A physiotherapist identifies which of your muscles are weak and designs special exercises for you to do. So those muscles are selectively strengthened. I think our writing muscles are very weak and need to be selectively strengthened. And we need to recognize that. And there are specific skills for that to happen. And one of the things I was is to look at a lot of pictures. There is no shortcut to it. You need to be familiar with that, with the medium itself. If you sing, you go up and down the scales. If you're a musician, you practice the chords. If you're a writer, you write and you read. We don't do enough stuff. certainly we don't do enough serious reading. So until that happens, where will the writers come from?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I'll just ask one more question. Shahidul, I mean, you've been a mentor, a teacher, an institution maker, somebody who made, in early years, created a site of confluence for, artists, especially photographers, also the indigenous, to kind of gather together. The Chobi Mela was, one of the important sites of engagement for many people, in that sense. But in recent times, we saw many other institutions coming up, in different parts, also in Dhaka, also in Cochin. You're seeing that, Kathmandu emerging with another triennial. But as a storyteller, you've also been very much keen on, telling the stories of your surrounding, your people, what you saw, what you chase, through a very journalistic way. But in recent times, if you see that, we see our priorities are changing, especially with the regimes. There's a lot of capital tendencies emerging into, there are a lot of investment interests coming into. So you see a kind of a conflict between our neighboring, countries. I think we are supposed to be live in the zone of enmity. So, as a cultural commentator or an institution builder, I'm just asking you as a kind of to also continue some of my interest and research in subcontinent, which I've been doing since last 3-4 years. How do we, build, a better neighborhood? What is the, so how do we get away from this colonial settings, the colonial mindset, and also believing only in a very Euro-American centric idea about art aesthetics and in other things? So what do you think, what should be the modalities of operations to kind of tell the stories of our neighborhood and, our culture?
Firstly, I think what we need to differentiate when we talk of, say, relationships between our countries is the relationships at a foreign policy level and a relationship at a people-to-people level. India, of course, played a very important role in the liberation of Bangladesh. But in such a time, India has really destroyed its goodwill in Bangladesh through its big drug attitude, not only with Bangladesh, but with everyone around. And when you consider how important India was to us in 1971, the fact that so much goodwill has been lost, it takes genius to lose that goodwill so quickly. Yet they've been able to do so. Yet, when I was in jail, I think the biggest movement was in India. There were massive movements in Mexico, and of course, my nieces and other people were involved so in Europe and North America, things happened. But India, by far, did the most quickly, most aggressively, and really stood up. It gave us a huge amount of space. You mentioned other schools within Bangladesh, but also schools in other countries. We have been involved in most of these schools in some capacity by mentoring, nurturing, financially supporting in some cases, and continuing to support many of our alumni, I think, teachers there. And certainly, Sudharak, I think, came to Chobi Mela, and that's how his work I was able to recommend for the All Roads and things like that. I remember Dinesh and Prashant coming to Chobi Mela, and we shared all our experience, including our budgets and headings and what went wrong and whatever. And of course, I was there at the first Delhi Photo Fest, playing a central role. I think that fraternity is very, very strong. But what we've allowed our governments to do is to build walls between us, which we ourselves do not recognize. And I think it is up to us to take control of that situation. I cannot let my government or your government determine what your and my relationship will be. And our relationship will transcend that. And I think our strength is greater than their strength. What has happened is we've not relied sufficiently upon our collective strength. What we've not done is we've not developed the collective community. We've not done things in a sufficiently synergistic manner. And I think the question you raise is very valid, and I think those answers need to be found. The reality is we all need to survive, we struggle, and in doing so, we obviously do not always look far enough ahead. But I think we are visionaries in our own ways, and that looking ahead and looking ahead collectively is something that has to happen.
Thank you. Thanks, Dhak.
Sir, I think you're on mute.
First question. Can I ask one question? Okay, how you are coping with pandemic, and tell the artist and photographer to respond to the pandemic. I'm confused now. Everyone is confused with pandemic. There's so much of a scare. There's so much of yeah. So what should be the response?
I couldn't hear very well. Is the question, how are we responding to the pandemic?
Yes, yes. How you are responding and how artists and photographers should respond.
Okay. Firstly, of course, it has made living very difficult for a lot of people. And one of the things, despite the fact that we are in such a difficult situation ourselves, both Pathshala and Drik have set up grants for photographers so they can continue to work under this situation. But I think the danger we face is, of course, there is the physical danger of proximity and going out and the risk one takes and things like that. So one has to be sensible in doing work. But I think the bigger risk is in a sense falling into the trap of the stereotypes. And a lot of the work that I began to see were people wearing masks or empty roads, or the very visible manifestations of pandemic which have happened all around. And they're important to document. I'm not disputing that, but I think we need to go far beyond that. And those are the more nuanced, more penetrating, and more intelligent ways of telling these stories. And lives are complicated. This virus has affected our lives in very complicated ways. And I think this is a time when we can take on a different way of storytelling. And one of the things we've just decided to do, for instance, is we will be bringing out the next Drik calendar on COVID itself. And we have asked all our photographers, in fact, today the call went out, we've asked all our photographers to be producing photographs which go beyond the tropes, which go beyond the stereotypes, which look at a much more peripheral and deeper, insightful way of looking at the story. Some of the things we've looked at is, in all our countries, sadly, we have very autocratic regimes, and they have used Corona as a way to suppress things, to deny us our rights. The infringement on our human rights, which we would normally never have accepted, we have accepted at this time because of the excuse of COVID. Okay, it's COVID, so now maybe this is allowed, maybe, and governments have used that as an umbrella to get away with all sorts of things. What artists have done within that is found very, very interesting ways to be defined, to question, to produce art which goes, overrides and challenges makes it difficult for the government to be able to do it. I mean, they have guns, they have money, they have muscle. What they do not have creativity, what they do not have is integrity. And those are the strengths we should be mobilized. And some of the artists have done that. So we are looking at ways in which those things can happen. And I think looking at all those other things which have been manifestations of COVID in terms of real life, some of which are difficult to visualize. And, you know, in photography, photography is very good at depicting what is in front of the lens. Whatever is happening in front of the lens, we take pictures and we show. Yeah? It's not as good as photographing the invisible. It is not as good at being subtle. It is not as good as working on metaphors. But those are the challenges I think we need to be able to take on. I think now is the time when we can leave our blunt instruments and take on the more subtle ones and begin to photograph in a way which looks and goes under the skin and discovers things which are not visible to the naked eye, perhaps, in the same way. And also think much more out of the box than we've done. And I'm excited about what we might come up with. But you know, there are also ways of life which have changed, and those can be studied, and those can be personal. I know one of our photographers has done a beautiful story on his relationship with his children, which in the normal days was not as profound because he was a photographer going out doing things, whatever. Now that he's inside, he is using that time to get to know his children better, and he has done a photo essay on that relationship between father and children, which I think is beautiful. It should have been done under normal times, but now is a time when he's turning the thing around and doing it. And there are so many other things about it.
Wonderful. Shraddha?
So it was it was a really wonderful experience meeting all you people here. Thank you so much for your time. And so anyone would like to Vasant sir, Kamu sir?
Vasant, you want to summarize?
Thank you. Thanks to all. It's been wonderful chatting. This gives me enough to think about for the whole week, I think. And thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. And it's good to see you all.
This interview will stay with me for a really long time. Thank you, sir.
Hope to see you soon.
See you.
Hope to see you in person.
Thank you so much, sir.